Hi everyone, welcome to the MQ Health Wellness series on how to beat stress. My name is Victoria Barrett. I'm a psychologist working at Mindspot Clinic, which is operated by MQ Health, and I'm pleased to be presenting to you on the topic of stress. To start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I am presenting from, the Wallumattagal people of the Darug Nation, and offer my respects to elders past, present and emerging. In today's presentation, I hope to destigmatise stress by defining stress, comparing acute versus chronic stress, and discussing why we all get stressed. Then I try to demystify stress by exploring ways that we can respond to stress, and I'll share a model of how to recognise the signs. Then I'll provide some practical tips on dealing with stress, and lastly I'll discuss workplace stress. So let's try to reduce the stigma around stress. Stress is a response to an adverse demand that's commonly coming with an associated physical, mental and emotional response. It has been described as a deviation from some norm or steady state. So by that I mean, it's a change in our usual experience of feeling safe and at ease. There are two types of stress, and these differ in duration and intensity. The first is acute stress, which is stress that lasts for a shorter period of time and can be experienced in a milder form, such as stress surrounding starting a new job or meeting a deadline, or can be experienced in a more severe form, such as experiencing significant trauma like an accident or an assault. Chronic stress, on the other hand, is stress that continues for a longer period of time, and too can vary in intensity, like an ongoing relationship problem, being bullied, or living in the home where there is violence. Who gets stressed? We all do. It's really normal and very common in fact. 35% of Australians reported having a significant level of stress in their lives, and it's probably higher now because that number is pre-pandemic. We also know that younger people and those who are not working have lower levels of well-being. Can stress be good for us? I guess you've all heard that stress raises our cortisol levels, and research has told us that the experience of stressful events can lead to the onset and progression of certain diseases and mental health problems, such as depression, cardiovascular disease, infectious diseases, and cancer. But stress can be good for us. It can be channeled into a positive and constructive outcome. Because we get that increase in adrenaline, for a short time we can be more alert, and this can increase our performance levels. Also, the stress response can instigate the body's natural fight or flight response when we're faced with danger. As I was just hinting at, we experience stress as a response to some form of harm, threat or challenge. In fact, we respond to stress in two ways. On a neuroceptive level, and that's when we're reacting to stimuli in a non-conscious way. A great example of this is when we might notice a coiled up garden hose and react, become startled. And this is because we've maybe mistaken it for a snake. This kind of response to threat or harm occurs so quickly by our brain and body before we have time to make sense of it. The other way that we can respond to a stressor is on a perceptive level. This is when we appraise the threat or challenge in the environment. For instance, when we feel that the demands of a situation exceeds our resources and we can't cope. This subjective appraisal can also be a protective factor, like when we perceive a greater sense of control over the situation and greater self-efficacy. These things can help us to feel less stressed and more capable to manage the stressor. In general, the literature though tells us there are 4 main ingredients for stress. These are a stressor. So in the first place, there needs to be some kind of event. And not all events are made equal. Some stressors are more potent than others. For instance, like giving a speech versus a significant trauma. Secondly, there needs to be some sort of evaluation by our body and mind that determines there is a harm, threat or challenge. That's that kind of neuroceptive and perceptive reactions I was mentioning before. Thirdly, there's a complex pattern of effects on our body, and this is known as the stress reaction. Finally, there's the coping process used by our body and mind to deal with the stressful demands. So let's now start to get into understanding the stress reaction and signs to pay attention to that tell us we might be stressed. There is a range of physical, behavioural, mental and emotional responses, I've made a list here and I want you to scour the list as it's on your screen and start to recognise some of the signs that you might notice within yourself when you become stressed. Maybe some signs you experience early on, like starting to feel tense or overthinking, compared to some that might happen down the track, like a headache or appetite changes. As you can see, there is a wide variety of signs for stress. And now I want to share a model that we can all use to start to catch these signs early. This model is called polyvagal theory and describes how our automatic nervous system works, like a personal surveillance system that's constantly scanning for signs of safety or danger. Our nervous system responds to these environmental signals through 3 pathways. These are called the ventral vagal, which is at the top, and that's where we feel safe and connected. The sympathetic is in the middle, and that's our fight or flight response when we're stressed. And then at the bottom of the ladder, there's the dorsal vagal, or a shutdown. When we have a step ladder to describe how we move up and down, it gives an example of how we can start to monitor for our signs. For instance, imagine I'm driving along to work. I'm listening to the radio, I'm happy, I'm content, and I'm probably sitting at the top of the ladder. Let's say all of a sudden I hit a whole bunch of traffic and I start to think, oh gosh, I'm going to be late to work, I'm going to miss that presentation. I start to catastrophize and maybe I get tense in my shoulders and grip onto the steering wheel. I've started to fall down the ladder into the middle. Now what happens to people when they're constantly in a state of stress? They're more prone to falling off the ladder, and that's when they become immobilized or shut down, where everything's too much and it's harder to work back up the ladder. So back to me being in my car. How do I move back up the ladder? I might start to take some deep breaths. I might check my maps for a faster way and remind myself that I'm never late and I've got a very understanding boss. And here I start to feel less tense, less panic, and move up the top of the ladder again. I share this because I want us to all think about our job as being the state detector, knowing where you sit on the ladder, because if we can identify it and label it, then we can become effective at regulating our response to the stress. So then, how do we deal with stress? I want to share some general strategies with you all about managing stress, and then some research about the things that we can all do to look after ourselves, and that's called the Things You Do research. So first off, it's helpful to learn some ways to relax. This includes things like meditation, yoga, breathing, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation. Don't underestimate how slow and deep breathing can help settle our body back down when we're feeling on edge and tense. It helps to bring us back up the ladder. The next is regular exercise, walking, running, gym, whatever you do to move your body. It can help to take your mind off things, release the endorphins that help us to feel good and improve our mood. It also helps with sleep and feeling more relaxed and accomplished afterwards. Exercise also helps to reduce the negative effects of stress, like heart, digestive and immune problems, so it protects our body from those impacts of stress too. Next, there's social connections. It's important to talk to others, maybe debrief, to be heard and validated, get a different perspective. It also helps when we feel safer in the company of a trusted friend or a loved one. Again, that's moving us back up the ladder. Earlier I was mentioning that one of the ingredients for stress is our appraisal of the situation. In other words, the evaluation that our mind does that tells us we have a demand or a problem. Research shows that those who believe that they can competently deal with the aspects of their stressor are more likely to use problem-focused coping, and for that reason can focus on things that they can control, like the way that they choose to react to a problem. And finally, it's important to recognise when things are not improving with time, to reach out to your GP, a psychologist, a counsellor, or some professional support. So now I want to share with you some research that's being done at the eCentre Clinic that looks at what are the most important things that we can do to support our mental health and how often we should do these things. The eCentre Clinic has now conducted 6 clinical trials in 2 countries with over 20,000 people. And based on these trials, they've identified the Big Five, which is the 5 most important things that you can do for your mental health. And these relate to meaningful activities, healthy thinking, goals and plans, healthy routines, and social connections. So let's break them down a little further. Meaningful activities include things that give us a sense of accomplishment or satisfaction. Healthy thinking is things like having a healthy perspective or treating ourselves with respect. Goals and plans includes things like planning and looking forward to things. Routines includes going to sleep and waking up at the same time, our diet and exercise. And lastly, social connections includes having regular social contact with the ones that we love or value. What we know is that the more often we do these actions, the better. About 3 to 4 times a week is ideal for good mental health. So to help us all increase our mental health and ultimately be able to deal with stress, here are some suggestions to reflect on for a moment that pertains to each of the Big Five. Reflect on what you love to do but aren't doing. Review your self-talk. Check for things like I'm not good enough, smart enough. Review your plans. What are you looking forward to achieve and when? Reflect on your work, home, relationships and personal passion routines. What can you tweak? Reflect on your social network. Consider if you need to make a change. Lastly, I'll talk a bit about stress in the workplace. Workplace stress is a stress reaction that occurs when the work demands exceeds the person's resources, capacity and capability to cope. It tends to increase when there is a perceived sense of lack of control over the situation. There can also be a domino effect, which is where the stressful event itself may trigger a sequence of other events. An example could be a loss of a job leading to a loss of income, possibly a residential relocation, and increased strain on one's relationship. Some causes of work-related stress might include longer hours, heavy workloads, job insecurities, lack of support, bullying and discrimination. How do we manage work-related stress then? Well, the best practice for managing stress in the workplace is to prevent and minimise stress before it becomes a risk to health and safety. Some other tips that we can try to do is recognise those unhelpful thoughts. For instance, we might say, I'm terrible at my job, and try to challenge that. We can try to improve time management and prioritising tasks. Having regular breaks, getting up to stretch, drinking enough water, and taking your meal breaks. Assertive communication, clarifying expectations, delegating and saying no as appropriate. It can also be helpful to get support from others. For instance, debriefing with a colleague to get emotional support, or support from your manager or supervisor, letting them know how you're going and coming up with an effective plan for managing the stressor. Finally, there's self-care to manage stress, like routines and taking time to relax and recharge. That's all for today. Thank you so much and have a great day.